Okay, everyone, if we could go ahead and bring us into session. Seth, could you do the roll, please?
Sure. Dick Wisnell.
Here.
Pam Curtis. Ron Saxton.
Here.
Hannah Vandering.
Here.
Duncan Weiss.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Seth. And also, let's introduce the people here at the meeting, and also then we'll go to the telephone. So let me start. Whitney, start with you and go around too.
Whitney Grubbs, OEIB Chief of Staff.
Toya Fick with Stand for Children.
John Sekarowicz, Oregon Business Council.
Doug Wells, Children's Institute and Quality Ed Commission.
Phil Donovan, Chalkboard Project. Gerald Hamilton, CCWD.
Krista Caldwell, CCWD.
Elizabeth Brand, CCWD.
Okay. And those on the telephone?
Nancy Golden, Chief Education Officer.
And anyone else? Okay.
PJ Sheehy, Children First for Oregon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to discuss, the first thing on the agenda is discuss the governor's vision and preliminary transformational areas. Nancy, you're on deck. Let's hear from you.
Okay, and is Danny there? Because we were going to share this. Danny Ledesma, is she there?
She's not here yet. She emailed me that the traffic is slowing her down.
Okay, so I'll go forward and she can fill in later. So,
Yeah, you want us to, we could jump ahead of you, leapfrog ahead, and if Pam is coming, she is coming, right?
I think Pam is coming
Okay.
and Danny, so they're both probably in
You want us to leap over that, Nancy, or not?
yeah, I think we could do the budget strategy and priority, and then the vision would be a nice thing to move into the process. So, because I'd love for you to hear from her too. So that'd be great.
Okay, great. Let's do that then. We'll go down to 3.0. And Whitney, give me some help here. We're discussing and adopting the full budget strategy and priorities document.
So you have in front of you what should be a near final version of the budget strategy and priority document. It's the 16-page, very meaty document around the thinking of the OEIB. And then you have a chart that is also labeled 15-17 budget strategies and priorities. And the chart really takes the key principles from the document and pulls them out in a way to try to make it a little bit easier for a reader to quickly identify what's in the document. So the idea behind this document is really one that gives a lot more context and is probably geared mostly toward our agency folks and folks that are deeply engaged. I think it's not necessarily a public piece. Hannah Vandering and I have talked about creating a public piece from it that is a little more accessible, but this is really the same format that the governor's office used last time to spell out the key priority areas. My hope is, and most of you have seen it, we looked at it in the last meeting, I've gotten feedback from Pam, gotten some feedback from Hannah, gotten some feedback from members of the HEC, and that's been incorporated in this version of the document. And so my hope is that the subcommittee could approve us going forward and using this document. It's been out in the public in various drafts. So there's nothing secret in it, but I would like to have the subcommittee sort of bless it so that we can move forward and begin to build our rest of the process around it.
Can you just clarify for me what use it means? Use it where? How? When you say yes, what will happen?
So, I mean, primarily, I think we can take the draft mark off of it.
Okay.
And we will also be distributing it to the agency heads and their budget folks as they move forward for budget preparation. It'll be a document that the board can refer to and this subcommittee can refer to as it does its work over the next 6 months, but it really is sort of a staging document. It defines the overarching vision of the OEIB with respect to the next biennium's budget.
Well, I think it's a good document, and I support moving forward with it.
Yeah. Can you give us the hard timeline now, what, that we're, I guess combining our meetings, we have to present to or give recommendations to the governor by when?
So we could skip to that, but I think it would probably be better if we
Okay.
waited and did some of the framing first.
I see,
And
okay.
then,
That sounds,
yeah.
sounds
so
like me.
I know, no,
Just
that's
get to the bottom
okay.
line
It's-
quick.
Yeah, it's hard to contextualize, I mean,
She's real polite though, isn't she?
Yeah,
Some of the rest of us aren't as polite.
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, 3 things you want to be thankful for. 1, you're not married to me. 2, you're not one of the kids. And 1, you don't work for me. I've been married 51 years, so.
Congratulations.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer would be that this is, the ultimate work of the board will need to conclude by September.
Okay,
And I'll
okay.
outline for you in a little bit a calendar of bringing forward recommendations from other boards and subcommittees and groups that will culminate in this group developing its sort of set of top priority recommendations. And this paper here really just spells out, you know, in general, the things that the OEIB has committed to for the past 3 years and kind of refines those focus areas.
Okay. Any comments? Yes.
So
comments?
I like the paper. I think I'm totally fine. The piece that I think would add value if we could create it is what I might call an outcome map, where we say, here are the key outcomes and define them in measurable terms. 3rd grade reading, we're currently at 70%. Our goal is to be somewhere, improving. So as the budget, we're very focused on, I see CTE, which I'm glad is here. So let's say on career technical education, the HEC understands that the interest of the governor is to get. And so we really ought to, I think if we could include that in whatever we're going out to the field to say we're looking for ideas that'll move the dial on these outcomes that we've defined would be, I don't know, I see you're looking at the outcome. We've got that document, but again, if we're thinking about, because a lot of this is about communications to the folks who are going to be making proposals, and what we're really looking for are budgets, changes in policy, changes in delivery that will lead to improved outcomes.
And Duncan, that is really critical to the folk that's outside of this room.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we get it, but I'm telling you,
Yeah.
we have to do we have to be aggressive towards the do-sayers that we're doing something.
And again, I think it would be worth talking about, are there 5 or 6 key outcomes that we think, will show that Oregon is on the move in the next 2 to 4 years that we could define.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I think a lot of people really struggle with using the word outcomes with education again. It's like, what does that mean what does that mean to the student that I'm looking in his eyes every day?
Yeah.
So we should talk about that.
Yeah, it's a term that really is, it's more of a business term that kind of strikes people odd in education. So we're looking for student success. We're looking for these things, but I think we have to be careful about how we frame that. When you're talking to a parent about their child, what is it you want to see? What will be success for your child in our public education system?
So I think that's a really good point, and so I think we should get the language right. When I mean outcomes, I'm thinking about results. So just to be clear what I'm talking about, to be, and again, we call it, but I think we should set a goal of significantly increasing the number of career technically educated folks who have jobs. And that would be a result that we want. And you call it an outcome or result, but that's something I think we should announce because I think it will reduce poverty and create a lot of value. I think we should set a goal or whatever you want to call it, that we want more folks, more young people reading at an earlier age. And again, whether you call it an outcome or result. We also might want to have a measure of satisfaction of parents and the experience of their child in school. That could be if we had that data and said it's currently at 40% or it's currently 80%, we want it to be at. But so whether those are called outcomes, results, goals, I don't care. But I think having the measures so that the folks in the field understand what the governor and the OEIB's priorities are is really important for getting people focused on this budget process.
So I think that's really useful input, and I think you're right on. We're taking things a tiny bit out of order, but the process that we would like to have this subcommittee discuss and move forward would involve, hi, come on up here, would involve us sending a package of materials out to the agencies that would include, and the folks that you'll see listed on, that we're asking to come before this subcommittee, that would include a template for them that would help them create a kind of results map where they're giving us their top priorities and showing us how they're linked to the goals and the metrics that are in the scorecard. So I think you're right. And so our intent would be to send the paper, to send a template, and to send a letter from Nancy giving some instruction on what it is that this subcommittee would like to see back. So again, if we can, if you don't mind approving the paper or approving it with the caveat that you want to, provide me with more feedback in the next, week, either of those would be great, because I do think we've got a lot of other pieces to put in place that are probably more important, and I'd like to sort of close the book on the long
You want to check
paper.
on your sheet.
I want to check it off on my sheet.
So
Guess what her outcome is.
Yeah, I know. I know exactly. Yeah. So just to be clear about what we're doing with it, this is the initial strategies that you want to forward out so that the different departments can start work. But we're looking at really reaching out to try to figure out the hopes and dreams and what it looks like when we create this system based on the ideas that we have put before us. So there's nothing, we're not saying, here's what we're investing in, here's why we're investing in it, this is the outline.
Yep, that's right, Hannah.
Perfect, thank you.
Is there, before I forget this thought, I agree with you on talking about outcomes, and I didn't get what you just said prior to the looking at child in the eye and that type of thing. And now I get that, but there's a lot of people who just see these headlines, and so we have 40th in the nation, we're this, that, and everything else. And I got a ton of these headlines that's very negative about our education system, and so I think there's a missed opportunity if we don't educate, as I've been educated the past 10 years or whatever, about what's going on. And so the outcomes to some people does make a difference if we're moving the ball forward.
I couldn't agree more, that's what people are seeing.
Right.
And they're not seeing what we've done to public education in those same articles about
Right.
the disinvestment that we've made, about the fact that there's a kindergarten classroom with 52 kindergartners with one first-year teacher. Now, is that the investment that all of us sitting at this table believe is appropriate for those students? If we're going to reach 40, 40, 20? So how do we get out through, and I think we can do a better job as the OEIB, as the governor, with the governor's help, to talk about here's what's really going on and here's what we need to be successful. I think that Quality Education Commission is working on best practice. Let's put it out there. These are the things and the investments that will really help us get to where we want to go. But I can't help that those who have the power to put things in the paper.
No, but if the outcomes are changed, if we do have positive outcomes, like work forward, I think that will take care of itself. I think people will understand that. Is it okay?
You were looking for a motion or something.
Yes.
After we approve this.
Okay.
Are we doing this
I thought
or these
both of them was
together?
a package.
Are they a
Probably a
package?
package, this is just the
Summary. of
This is
that.
the visual of this.
the headings from the paper, yeah.
Second?
Okay. Then moved and seconded that we move forward with the full budget strategy and priorities document. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great. Thanks, Whitney. That's great. Okay, let's. Pam did show up, Nancy, and
And Danny.
I've said this a couple times this morning, but being a car dealer, I should be happy with all this traffic. But taking 2 hours coming up here from Salem is Peter's joined us now too, and so
You had to
that's.
come all the way from Eugene,
Yeah.
so.
Oh,
Wow.
Almost 3 hours, so.
wow! You get to Seattle almost from there, right? And Danelle's with us too, so good. Okay, Nancy, you want to start this, or Pam? How you guys want to do
It
this?
was Danny, I think.
Daniel.
Yeah, I think
I'm
Nancy
sorry.
was going to kick us off.
Oh, I'm
Is Danielle there?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, so Danny, why don't you go ahead and then I'll fill.
So we're passing the ball.
Do you want, I'm happy to go. I missed it. Did you suggest I go
Oh, I
first?
thought it was Pam.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay, I'm happy to start. So,
Hard to tell them apart.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think this is really important for us to think about where we've been and where we're going. So I think what's really critical to this conversation about vision in primary transformational areas is that really what needs to guide us is our achievement compacts and the key outcomes that we've got along the pathway. And I think we all know those: ready for kindergarten, reading proficiency at third grade level, all the way up. And really we need to use a filter of everything we do. How do we make sure it moves those dials on those outcomes? Because we spent a few years coming up with them. We know they're research-based. We know they're going to make a difference in meeting that 40-40-20 goal. So that's the big idea. But then, and we gave you copies of this pamphlet, and I know I've handed out a few times sort of the literature we've been putting together this year. But the other key thing about this, of course, is the idea of educational equity and the whole idea of supporting our families and the idea of shared responsibility. So when we think of investment, a lot of investment goes out to our institutions. And there is a handshake about they're going to use that money plus whatever strategic money we have to help us meet these outcomes on the Achievement Compact. Now, they certainly have other outcomes that their boards define and things like that, but there is a handshake about that. And the official thing that makes that handshake official is the process they go through in their school districts to bring together teachers, management, to go to your budget committee and set your targets for how to get there. So, and we've talked about ways of improving that last time. So then it's like, what are the four big things we say we're really going to focus on given this? And two of them we call important throughout the process. And one is the poverty to prosperity, and we know what the governor says, and I believe so deeply, is we've got to make sure our economy is strong. We need to move people out of poverty to prosperity, because when we do that, we have healthy communities who can continue to help support our children and fund our education program. So that's one of the big focuses, and that's across education and all other areas. And then, of course, the second one is the educational equity. We know that in order to get the 40-40-20, we've got a lot of students in the opportunity gap, and we need to be really clear to partner with community partners who have made a big difference with kids in our opportunity gap, specifically our students of color, our English language learner students, and we need to be the best practices to move those kids to meeting or exceeding standards. So those two are the big overview focuses. And then as we get a little bit more specific, what we know is reading changes the game, that third grade benchmark is so critical, because if we get kids reading proficiently by third grade, 4 times as many of them are going to graduate from high school and have an opportunity to go on into post-secondary education. And then, of course, the last one is paving the pathway to the future. That's bridging high school to post-secondary. And what we know is why the target on the Achievement Compact, which is so critical around this one, is that 9 college credits in high school, because we know for some kids who might think they can't succeed in college because they could be the first generation or because nobody's put signals out that they could succeed, having taken 9 college credits, they say, I can do this, I have access. They work with the organizations to figure out how to get scholarships and to go forward. So those are our big areas of focus, the outcomes on the Achievement Compact, and then those 4 areas I talked about, along with an important handshake.
So the only thing I would add is that when we sort of go into the budget process itself, if we dial into the sort of strategy 2 where we focus in on investments, so within each of those strategies, we're looking for ways to prioritize and ways to think about how we can be transformational, how we can think about increasing funding, being more effective with the funding that we have, and thinking about how across all P20 agencies we can really continue to push and think how are we doing business differently to reflect the priorities that we've established and the priorities that we want to eventually see outcomes reached against that. So I think what the exciting part is that we have a really great opportunity to really, I'm a knitter, so we can really, really knit together a lot of really good work that's been done across the continuum of P20, and really think about the agency's work that supports that, the community work that supports that, the school work that supports that, working with educators to really think about how we can dig a little bit deeper into each of these strategies so that the budget reflects all of this really great work that's going on right now. And so I think that coming in, I celebrated my 3-month anniversary yesterday, so so I feel very senior right now. But I would say that coming into this, what's been really great is to see that our priorities are set. We have good support for these priorities. It really is sort of like tying down and really trying to think about in implementation and in the way that we carry out the good intentions that are out there. That we're thinking about alignment, we're thinking about effectiveness, and we're thinking about how really we're from a budget standpoint, we're really focusing in on strategies and investments that really get us to where we want to be. So I'm looking forward to the governor's process with agencies where we have established funding teams that I believe that can dovetail really nicely with this work that's happening now, outcomes investments. We're going to be convening 9 it's 9 or 7 9 different funding teams where the idea is we really want to sort of think about those cross collaborations across agencies. I'll be leading the kindergarten readiness to 3rd grade reading funding team, and that team will really focus in on how can we, again, looking at those priorities that Nancy established around those 4 outcome, those 3 of the 4 really touch that. We'll be working with the Early Learning Commission, with the Youth Development Commission, with the Department of Human Services, as well as OEIB and ODE.
So those are agency teams?
Yes, agency teams. And I think in May, the focus will really be on sort of getting agencies to think about how their work is reflective of community priorities. And then we'll be sort of eventually, those concentric circles of influence will begin trying to weave those and knit those different priorities together so you have a really comprehensive look at where everyone's priorities are.
So my reaction is always that, and I know it's a broken record, direction is great. It's a great vision. They're great goals. They're absolutely wonderful. They're supported, as Nancy said. No debate about all of that. That's wonderful. So direction is great. What I think you need to really focus on is speed. Because, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I mean, we're halfway from when the legislation started, the 40-40-20 goal to the deadline, and we've made no progress, I think. And so if our goal is to get there by 30-20, we're on a good path. If our goal is to get there by 2020, we're creeping along. And so when we talk about all the things you want to accomplish and how we're going to align incentives and stuff, I think you need to be thinking about, are they incentives for baby steps, or are they incentives for actually moving the needle?
Yeah. Well, I think there's good, healthy tension between sort of how do we land on statewide strategies that really that we know are effective, that are supported by educators, by communities, that we know are the things that will help us get there, that we need to really be strategic about which strategies. We can't do them all.
Right,
and we need to have a sense of urgency about the ones that we know will get us on the trajectory that we need. But also there is healthy tension around the sort of tight, loose, and local control, where we want to make sure that we have good balance between those two.
Right, and ultimately, the governor gets to make a call, and he needs to make a call about, we can't wait for everybody to agree. If we wait for a unanimous vote on what to do, we're never, ever going to move. And so he gets to decide, but he needs to decide about speed as well as direction.
And I just to chime in on what Ron just said, though, from my point of view, also, it's in the context of the environment, and we're not anywhere near where we want to be because of the outcomes of the past. And there's, like Hannah says, there's reasons for this and what have you, but we're still, 50th in the nation on achievement gap on minorities, we're X numbers. And so the perception out here is that we need to improve our outcomes. The third grade reading and all that stuff. So that's the environment. So the sense of urgency, I think, really does play into it. It's a cliche, but if you're sitting on the Titanic, it's okay to be excessively impatient. So blah blah blah. But we really do need to have that timeline. So
Yeah. Well, I think there's a great opportunity for this body to really sort of continue to push on that. And when we think about, and as you were considering and hearing people's inputs about the strategies and priorities over there, your opportunity is to say, like, this, and to have that good balance to say, like, is this fast enough? Are we on the trajectory that we think that we need to be on, or do we need to, revisit and sort of revise?
And to me, that comes back to the metrics. I mean, if we have the measures, we can then, to Ron's point, there's some of these that I think actually can move pretty fast. And we ought to, some are harder, clearly.
Right.
Just as you go, but we ought to have that conversation. And I think for the whole benefit of this whole enterprise, finding some numbers we could move quickly that are also meaningful. And again, I'm going to be a little broken record on this for a while, but I think we absolutely should have a career technical goal where we, in the next 3 to 4 years, dramatically increase those who get the technical training to get a job. That's something I think through the heck we could figure out ways of doing that. And it relates to the high school credits, and it relates to a lot of different pieces. But if we do that, we're going to have a lot more Oregonians employed. We're going to have a lot more Oregonians out of poverty. We're going to have a lot better economy. I just hear it everywhere right now. And that's something I think is very doable, and that we could probably, I don't know what, we have to get the metrics and really understand where we are, and Elizabeth could help us on that. And then we ought to figure out how to significantly, dramatically improve in that area. And if, things like that, and again, I'm using that as one example, I think will build a lot of credibility for the whole enterprise. And I think it would mobilize the community, because I think if we put that out now, I think you get business, community colleges, high schools, there are a lot of people out there who want to help on that. And I think we can come up with new strategies.
So I just add, when we talk about what outcome do we want, that's a very good discussion and one we should have. But I think as you go through the budget process, you should talk about, okay, if we do whatever it is you're proposing to do, what outcome is likely to come from that?
That's exactly the question at the budget. The budget should answer, this budget, if we do these things, we believe will result in these outcomes.
Right.
That's what the
gotta have
budget
the
to me,
ROI.
that would be how I would want the budget presented.
Right.
And I think we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said 2020. Is that?
Did I misspeak?
It's
Sorry,
2025. Yeah, 2025. So, yeah. So
I always, there are too many,
there are a lot of
there are
numbers.
too many things that happen in different years, sorry.
So what we've done through the OEIB work with achievement compacts is we've said, here are the things that we want. And so we've sent those out. Now we're 2 years in and getting information back. And what we're doing now is trying to figure out, because I've talked with a lot of people who've been on those committees. And Beaverton is having their last committee meeting today, I think it is, for this year. And they're having those conversations about what we need to do in order to move the dial. And so they're really digging into, if we want to see third grade reading improve, what changes would we make? And so they're trying to find some strategies. And then they have this budgeting process. And then at the same time, I'll tell you, one of the biggest things right now going on is we're implementing the Common Core State Standards, and we're looking at Smarter Balance being implemented, and all these districts are having conversations. And one of the huge issues is, how are we going to have the technology? How are we investing in the technology that will allow us to do this? So do we, sitting at this table, really want all of our districts to invest all of this money in technology to be able to take a standardized test so that we can see where students are at a moment in time? Or should we be telling them, you know what, slow down. Look at what will really make a difference in student achievement. Let's make those investments. Now, when it comes to the technology, how are we going to get there? I think we should look at a statewide plan. If we believe that it's so important that we do this smarter balanced, and this technology is not there for the districts, then we need to step in and we need to say, okay guys, we're requiring that you do these standardized tests and you have to have this technology to do it, so here's the money for you to make it happen. Because that investment is getting in the way of our districts and our schools being able to invest in what will move third grade reading, because that standardized test is not going to move third grade reading. But we push that stuff out and the feds tell us you must do it. So where are we at it on that right now? As a group, do we believe they should be investing the money that we're giving them through this common state school fund in that? Or should we be saying, no, we're making you do this, so here's the money to get the technology that you need in order to give that test? Because that's got to be their priority if we don't do it. And it shouldn't be, in my opinion.
Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, Pam and I will remember this, in the architecture and the budget process 2 years ago, we had these 3 different categories of funding. One was what we call statewide infrastructure, that we believed had to be led by the state. That could be any state agency, but in this case, it's really what Peter's been working on, this whole database. And that really should be, if we think it is a statewide DNA that needs to be built, then it really should be in the state responsibility. We ought to be thinking about how to budget at the state level. So I guess I'm just completely agreeing with you. We need to define what the state deliverables are, and we again ought to have measures. And yeah, here they are on the sheet. Thank you. Sorry, Whitney. So that would come in that category. So we ought to, and to me, the budget process should definitely ask, where are we going to be on the longitudinal data system in the next 2 years, and what can Beaverton and all the districts expect, so that there's accountability to the state. I mean, that's, to me, the state needs to be accountable for producing that.
They can't even schedule. They can't even schedule
Right.
high school classes right now because they're looking at the amount of time that they need to have that technology available. This is the reality of the struggle with what's going on right now. And I think, Ron, to your point, I couldn't agree more. Every student, we need to make sure we're moving the dial on it. We need to do it now. I've got my great nieces and nephews. So how do we do that in a strategic way from where we sit up here at this level, without really hearing what the struggles are right now in our districts across the state to do some of the things that we believe are important. And that's why I think this outreach and really digging in so they tell us and that we listen intently and then say, here's the priorities. And I think it is our students moving on that continuum as quickly as possible is our priority.
No, I think that's exactly right, Hannah, and what I would see in the process as we get a little deeper and for example, Rob comes forward and says ODE believes that the priorities are these 3, and you see that technology is not there, or I think that's the give and take where we start to dig in and say, well, if we're really going to get here, and do a results map, if we really want to get from A to B, these are a couple of the infrastructure pieces that we're currently missing, and how are we going to fund those? Is that going to be through the allocation? Is it a strategic investment? How do we? I think that's exactly the kind of.
Do we discuss it? We discuss this later on the agenda here too, with Peter, with public input.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Pam, not to call you out, but you seem to be awful quiet.
Thinking.
That's scary.
One of the things we talked about on the statewide services last time, and I'll throw this out, is to use, and it is there, the P20 database, is to have customer satisfaction measures. So we'd ask teachers, if you've got this data system that's giving you information, how well is it working? So that, again, as the state does that work, there is feedback from the field, also from policymakers, is the information you're getting from the database giving you the information for good policy decisions. And I think getting, if you will, the customer satisfaction measures would be really helpful as we do this work as one of the results.
And I think that we're going to get the Tellurium survey results back mid-May. I mean, it takes a while for us to get that, but I think once we get it, we are going to have an opportunity as the OEIB, as this subcommittee, to look at what the perceptions are on the teaching and learning conditions, and then how do we use that for us at the same time it's being used in the districts and in the individual schools to
Okay, any other discussion on that then? Okay, we jump now to 4.0. Brittany, this,
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think this will be the fun part because you've all sort of been pushing toward this. And what I want to look at first is the,
I've been waiting for the fun part.
you have a way of just zinging me. You're lucky I don't get offended easily. So this piece, that's outcomes and investments, subcommittee schedule, that's got some detail on it. Seth gave you a sheet that has less detail but does have locations. I gave you this sheet that's got who we're thinking should come before you. So I think this is really the last meeting where we're doing the boring process piece, and from this point on, what we would like to do is invite these different groups to come before you. And the first thing I want to talk about is, before we get to the groups and the schedule, was really what Duncan raised right up front, which is what are we going to ask these groups to present? What's the template that we can provide them, the instructions that we can provide each of the different, boards or recommending bodies that are coming before you. And I think from what I've heard, and what I had spoken with Nancy and Danny and Ben and others about previously, is really asking folks to, I'll just give you a couple ideas, and this is for us to bounce off each other and improve, but to have folks, bring the top 3 to 5, and it's hard to say investments, it's really, top 3 to 5 change strategies, investment strategies, things that are critical, things that you want to do differently.
Can you just say strategies?
Probably strategies, yeah, okay. And then, the top 3 to 5 strategies, we would like folks to think about how they fit within yes, how they fit within the categories on that sheet. Is it a system thing? Is it an investment thing? Is it a seamless system piece? And then the most important piece, I think, is really this idea of what are we going to buy? What are we buying with these investment dollars? So where do you think this is going to get us? Looking ahead, if we're going to increase investment in professional development for teachers, what are the metrics that we think are important, and then what do we think we're going to accomplish with this investment? And so this would be incumbent upon each of the various groups that are much deeper into the work to be really looking at what they would want to bring. The other thing that we discussed having folks identify, and it would be applicable more to the agency presentations than to, say, the STEM Council or a group like that, but it would be, and then what are the top 3 to 5 things, efficiencies within your organizations, or things that we should no longer be doing? Because I think, and you talked to us about this, Pam, I think it's really important that we're not setting this up as only an added investment strategy, but really how are we leveraging and repurposing existing funds in order to be able to do things differently? What's the priorities there? So that's kind of my just very first sense of what an instruction template to these groups would look like.
Also, I'd like to piggyback on what they ask is what Peter gave us at the OEIB meeting on the aspirational goal setting, as well as the productive goal setting. I mean, where do they? Peter, no, I'm not giving you any credit for this at all, because I've been using this now ever since you gave that. I mean, that description of Kennedy was really right on. I mean, we're going to go to the moon. He had no idea how we were going to get to the moon. Did it, said 10 years, did it in 9. Blah blah blah. But to have that type of goal setting with and this is just from a business point of view, but an entrepreneurial spirit of maybe we should give every one of these people that we're asking here, who moved my cheese book, you know. I've got them in the car, matter of fact, the elementary one that has big pictures in it. But we see, I get off my soapbox here, but it seems like we have an attitude of change is, like Ron and I can agree on change, and then the next year I say, well, Ron, I thought you were going to change. You didn't mean me. You didn't mean me. You were going to do the changing. So, you know, we need to have kind of put a knife to that type thing. So, any other comments on how we want to do?
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Deb.
You go first. You've been quiet today.
So I like what you've outlined. There are a couple of things that I think we need to dig a little deeper on, and so I have some thoughts about it. You can frame it however you want, Whitney, but I want to reinforce what you said about what difference. I mean, it's really what measurable difference. If we make this investment, we should see what by when, and for how much. Right? Where I think sometimes we fall back and we go too slowly, to Ron's point, is that we invest in something that we think is going to make some measurable difference, and then we stick it in the system we currently have. Mm-hmm. And we don't pay enough attention to what else needs to change around it mm-hmm. in order to enable, in a good way, for that change to actually stick and happen. So I don't exactly know how we get at that, but I want to hear from folks what they need to enable that change, and what I want to hear an articulation that they understand. That means everybody has to change, right? If I'm going to come as the ELC chair, somebody's going to come, and I should be prepared to say, if we do this, this is what it's going to take, and this is how we need to do it differently.
Right.
The other piece, and it's kind of the last one, and it's kind of two sides of the same coin, is that I have things just with my ELC hat on, to use as an example, I have things that I need from some of these other groups in order to support and enable what I think is going to make a big difference in the ELC. And I want to be able to tell you, and I want to hear with this hat on, what they need from each other. Sort of the ability to place orders, I think is how I talked about it a couple of years ago. Yeah. The ability to place orders. And then lastly, I have some perspective now from where I'm sitting, for example, in the ELC, and doing this work for almost 4 years, about where I would want to make an investment in order to enable another piece. So these last two pieces, there's two sides of the same coin, but it's really about helping these folks help us see the systemic and hydraulic connections, so that as we have to prioritize, we have their perspective about what lever we could push that actually could trigger several things. Yeah, I love that.
So my friendly amendment, I like this basic structure, but I would suggest this. What if rather than going, we've got basically this in silos. Mm-hmm. Why don't we have a big map of the outcomes Nancy identified on the wall, and start with age 3 benchmark for what is it going to take, whatever, I don't know exactly how that measures, but we've got the first 3 years, have Pam talk about that, and then do 3 to 3 and talk about what it's going to take 3rd grade, and have really organize these sessions not around our traditional silos, but have the QEC come in and talk about what it's going to take to get 3rd grade reading with the Early Learning Council, because there's that, and really walk through the continuum by the outcome measures rather than by the silos. And ideally, I mean, so then when Ben comes in,
if it doesn't fit one of them, then there's a problem.
There's a problem, and then Ben comes in and we talk about the 11 through 14 and what are we doing there, and so we have a way to really make sure we're getting this integrated story, because I think a lot of the problems we're having are the handoffs, and that's what Nancy's working on. And if we model that in this budget process, I think it gets us, I think, potentially more to where we want to be. So I would have actually put the early learning first, just if we're going along a continuum, but there may be a reason in terms of readiness.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So two things on that point, because I think you're right. I mean, if you conceptualize it and build it from the ground up, that would be the best approach. The two things that are keeping me from wanting to go that route, one is simply logistics, and having all of these different groups spend this much time. You know, I mean, we've designed it this way based on readiness and who can be there when.
Yeah.
The other piece is that the process that Danny described that the governor's doing is really a process of bringing together the cross-agency designs. And what I think you'll hear, especially if we set it up the way that Pam just described, you will hear them having already coordinated on these top priorities. In addition, Nancy, through her P20 cabinet, I mean, we are coordinated on those ideas. So I just think logistically it would be a lot to ask for us to have the panel of folks.
But however they come, addressing it the way Duncan described.
Yes,
You just say, we want you to,
Yeah.
so because the QEC, I mean, it's, I love the QEC, of course, because of many, many years. But they can address all these, I mean, across it. I would rather have them, I mean, I remember we did the targeted high school look one year. We've done, I mean, again, over the years, I mean, it could address each of these outcome areas with, best practices and so on. And I think it'd be a lot more productive to really, make sure we're focusing on each of the goal areas as we do this work. So whatever, I get what you're talking about.
But in this, I'm sorry, but in this form, I mean, in this grouping, we could, in the work sessions, organize the feedback and sort of like the workaround.
Yeah.
We could organize ourselves that way.
Yeah, exactly. Just say, please tell us which outcome, we'd like you to address outcomes that you have an interest in and what you're doing about them.
And the template could even have bubbles that say fill in other agencies that are going to have a direct
Key partners that
partnership
you
role
think you
and
need.
community partners.
Including, again, when we've been talking things like, obviously human resource partners are huge in a lot of these things, mental health, I mean, kids out is a big deal on attendance. There are a bunch of connections.
How do we get involved though from the people on the ground, from the teachers on the ground to the population, to the community, so we're not top down,
Right.
that we can be bottom up and get the buy-in of the public in general. I mean, we have to be specific. We have to have the management do this, but still, instead of, here's another deal, it's coming from the governor or coming from whatever. So.
As I was looking at this, my comment was, what about inviting some of the compact committee members who've been doing this work, who are having the conversation, so that we can hear from them what it looks like. How's that budgeting process, how's your work being used in the budgeting process? I think it would be really enlightening for us to understand that and then to help build something that is effective.
Could we build in like a presentation on the TEL survey results and like the mail in?
May 12th, I think, is the date, or May 18th is when it's coming out, when it'll be live. So it might be, I mean, we could do something. I'm just not sure if it would be
we
fully.
could do June, maybe?
So one thing that might be helpful is if we just look at the list of groups who is there and who we have slated, and then identify if there are other presentations. I think that would be really helpful, because I think you're right, a compact committee, a district, committee that has grappled with what this looks like on the ground would be really useful. And the one that folks might not be super familiar with, under June 19th, you'll see presentation from Network Advisory. So in the last legislative session, we were able to make the $45 million investment in support for professional development and evaluation and implementation for teacher effectiveness. And the Network Advisory really represents the key partners in that effort. So we've got OEA, Center for Great Public Schools, and Chalkboard, and ODE obviously is a critical partner. And they will be, that advisory, we've asked to really vision out where we need to go in the next 3 years, what are the top priorities, to really do this same activity and bring those results back. And the TEL survey is one of the pieces that I think is going to influence their decision making. And so I do think that's a place where we're directly going to be working with the partners in the field, have them do the recommendations to you, and I think that'll be powerful.
Peter?
Whitney, this is Nancy. I think the other thing with this conversation, it sort of relates to 4.0 when we start 5.0 when we talk about the public input strategy too. So, I heard the question of how do we get input from the public in general. So I think the next agenda item is going to inform this conversation.
Peter and then Ben?
I was going to say the same thing Nancy did.
Okay. Okay, Ben?
And I would just note, because knowing that the time of this committee is so limited and the desire, I think, for public input and that ground up process is so great, you should take some comfort in the fact that the recommendations that you'll receive, presumably from the Early Learning Council, from the HAC, from other entities, will themselves be the product of at least a certain amount of public engagement and engagement with our stakeholders. So this isn't the only table where that is possible, right? PM's meetings,
that's
my
right.
commission's meetings.
Maybe that ought to be a question too.
It is.
We're there. We are having lots of, from the HEC perspective, we certainly are.
So then we just have people articulate what process.
What process was
used
used,
for
yeah, exactly.
public input.
Ron?
Well, I want, I don't know if it's Danny or Whitney or who questioned. Beyond how do we avoid the discussion being purely about incremental investment, incremental actions? And go back to, you talked about repurposing and so forth. How do we make sure, how do you all make sure that the budget process takes seriously the repurposing part of that discussion? What's the notion of how that happens? Because it doesn't happen on its own. What happens on its own is everybody from every agency, from every educational institution talks about what they could do with more money, more people, more resources. And we need to force a serious reconsider. So how's that fit? You said it, how's it fit?
Well, I mean, so where I take that through is I look at this second strategy and the investments, right? And so there's increasing as part of it, but then there's also looking at the way that we focus on the base funding in K-12. So I think that is a strategy that's there, and we expect folks to sort of respond to those strategies and expect ourselves as agencies to look through that as well. So I think it's already articulated. I guess
I think you need more of a hammer. I mean, well, I'm serious. I mean, if I were going through the budget process and saying, okay, prioritize for me, if you had to cut X, what would you cut? What are the things that you identify as, they may be important, but they're the relatively lesser important of the things that you do.
Yeah.
So that somebody can then look at those and say, okay, here's a new list of things that we would like to do that we think are higher priorities than these other things. But you need somehow a forcing mechanism that allows people to help you identify what things are they currently doing. And no one's going to come in and say we're doing things that are unimportant. They're not going to do that.
Oh, yes, they are.
Okay, well maybe, but somehow there still needs to be a mechanism that forces either the what's unimportant or the what's less important, so it can be evaluated as part of the overall exercise. Because otherwise, most are going to just come in with give me more, give me more, give me more.
So in the state budget process, each agency has to propose two cut scenarios.
Okay.
So one is like a 10% cut, I believe.
Great. That's
So as
Yeah.
agencies, each agency has to do that. We haven't at the OEIB level sort of said across P20, come up with a different cut scenario. But, in terms of the state budget process, the CFO has sort of directed all agencies to propose, a 10% cut scenario and I think a 5% cut scenario.
But I think we could do it within this template. I mean, I think it's, what are your ideas about the places within your existing budget, where we can find efficiencies or not, things that are, that really we shouldn't be doing anymore. And then I think you go the next step and say, and what are the barriers to you not? Because in many cases you'll find there's either perceived or real barriers to stopping doing something.
Right.
And we could identify those as well in the context of asking the question.
Well, and that what would you not do if you didn't have to do it is another really important question.
Yeah, which is basically often regulatory barriers.
Right.
So if the ranking of this committee holds any weight, to me it's not a stick, but it's a carrot. And you say to the groups coming in, if you can excite this group about an idea that you have for repurposing resources, you're going to have more political will behind that idea.
Right. I mean, to me, the way it would work, the key to me is again in the measurement. To get people focused, you have to give a big addition. It's the moonshot.
Yeah.
It's saying, what is it going to take to dramatically improve on a particular measure? We understand it may mean investment, but it's almost certainly also going to mean redesign and of doing things differently. And then I think we can, and if we're clear about that, I think there are a lot of people out in the field who would love to think about redesigning systems to get better results. if they're given the understanding and permission to do that. And so I don't think it has to be, I guess I don't think it's a stick as much as is an enticement to say, we're really interested in this and we want your best thoughts on, Hannah, you've got barriers that you think things are getting in the way on third grade reading. Let's get them on the table and figure out a strategy that we're all comfortable that we really believe will lead to those better results. And again, and just as long as it's not just about more money, it's about money spent differently, potentially more money in redesign.
But it's going to take us being brave enough to be able to say, when people tell us what it is they don't believe is most important, we have to listen, and we have to be brave enough to push back on those things that are being pushed on educators that are making them do things that don't matter for students and are costing us a lot of money. It's out there, but nobody will listen because it's like, no, we have to do that. That's a mandate. Well, do we really want to hear? And do we really want to look at research about what moves student achievement? Or do we just want to say, okay, we'll do whatever we're told? I think Oregon is ready to stay. We want to move the dial. Our students deserve better. We're going to do it.
But it's both of them, and I think we have to go. I agree completely that there are things that if people were freed of requirements, they would be smarter and free to do. We have to identify those. But there are other things where we do need the stick. I mean, I've been screaming for 20 years about within 5 miles of where we're sitting, there are at least 10 school districts operating separate warehouses. That's just stupid. There's no reason to have 10 school warehouses 10 warehouse systems operating within 5 miles of where we're sitting right now. Well, no barrier to that changing, except every single school district decides they'd like to have their own warehouse. And so at some point, a little bit of a stick that says we'd be better off with a regional warehouse system so more dollars got to the classroom. So there are both of these. There are things happening because they're forced to go, but there are just dumb things happening because people don't feel like there's much pressure to change it.
Well, and I think we want a forward to the moonshot point. I mean, we're trying to look forward, but our budgeting system is a rearview mirror system, right? We start with what do we currently have, and you add, you adjust for population, and you adjust for inflation, and you adjust for all of these things, and then you just get more of what you currently have.
Right.
It's the mismatch between where we want to go and where we are stuck looking.
Okay, Ben, comment? No?
Well, I think this is a really important conversation. And in fact, I mentioned to Whitney yesterday the having made the move from spending a lot of time at this table to spending a lot more time at tables with colleges and universities and thinking in an agency staff and thinking in a more detailed way about budgeting. It's particularly clear to me how important the kind of forcing mechanism is in order to get something other than just an ad. Left to its own devices, that's what you'll get. It is also, however, particularly clear to me that I think especially within education budgets, where the vast majority, up to 97-98% of the state dollars are passed through to other entities, it's not as we can have a conversation at this table about the things we'd like to stop doing, but you better be prepared to then put that in law or put that very directly in a budget, because it's not necessary. So when you talk within higher education just specifically, well, let's stop doing X or Y. Well, the state doesn't do X or Y. The state funds entities that then use those dollars to choose to do what they want, frankly. And so we would have to be prepared, if you want to talk about what we're going to stop doing, the state would need to be prepared to be much more directive in that respect, or to be using allocating its resources in ways that we hope create the kinds of incentives that will lead the actors, the institutions, to do less of X and more of Y. I just think it's a challenge, right? I don't have a line item in my budget that I can strike that's going to instantly save dollars. Right? What we do, we have staff, but they're 1% of the total budget. So that's I think one of the challenges.
That's why this committee makes the big bucks.
I missed my check. So Ben, when you say that in K-12, the mandates that come down, that it is changing law.
Yeah.
It is changing
Yeah,
the mandates that are coming, and it's not only from the state, but it's from the federal government. And those things that are, districts are told, you will do this, and then you get, 20% of the funding in order to actually do this.
Yeah.
And then you're taking dollars that if you wanted to invest them to do something differently, you can't because you're required to do this. And this bucket of money, the strings attached to it are so tight that we can't get out of it without, again, us standing up as a state and saying, our students matter more than your mandates and your strings that are attached to this money. And here's what we believe is right. And at least be brave enough to say, and here's what we believe is right, and try. They can tell us no, but at least our students and our parents know that we've tried and we've done our very best to give them a quality education.
And I agree with you, Hannah. In K-12, more of the dollars, more of the resource allocation choices being made by the institutions are affected by mandates, federal and state. I'm reflecting. My comments reflect especially higher education, where there is very little in that regard from the state or federal government. They will argue, well, accreditation requires us to do the following, 100 things, and so there's that world out there as well. But I agree, there's a distinction there.
Okay, that's, I think, Hannah, that's called Emperor in His Clothing. We'll identify.
I'm ready.
Yeah, right.
Well,
right.
I would just say one more thing. I mean, I think that, so we've, as the OAB, we've identified that the theory of change is tight, loose, tight. That what motivates and that will sort of get us to the goals that we want to achieve is this sort of tight on outcomes, loose on how we get there. And maybe, there's debate about what the next tight is, right? But so to think about, so I think that there probably is some good work and some healthy debate to have around this idea of, well, what is a complementary sort of theory of change that goes with that has to do with investment and sort of what really incentivizes folks. So if at the federal level there are, there probably is a big sort of spectrum of opinions about the mandates, or is that just simply sort of articulating outcomes? There's probably healthy debate in that. But so that is the theory of change, where they're sort of at the federal level, sort of they pass money through, it's connected to mandates. Is that changing? Is that effectively change? Are we seeing the change that we want to happen? So I think that sort of moving through this year's budget, I think that we do need to have a sort of next layer discussion about sort of what are those strategies and tactics that really get that support tight, loose, tight, or do we have a sort of complementary theory of change or theory of action?
Okay.
And see, there's, I'm never a big fan of the tight, loose, tight, but when we talk about what we want money invested in, which is all the things we're talking about, I keep coming back to, at some level, it should be okay for us to have a discussion about what things should money not be invested in.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And wasteful spending is one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can have a discussion on tight loose on the accountability piece. There's, it's not sometimes a rather strange business model. But anyway, that's a different sidecar issue. Okay, Peter, we're going to move to you.
Okay.
Thank you for making the trip up from Eugene, Oregon.
You bet. So if you could refer to the graphic that has the columns on it and the arrows, and this obviously ties directly to what Whitney just presented in terms of the groups that are coming. The list of groups on this handout is in no particular order whatsoever. I didn't have the order from Whitney that they would be presenting, and I didn't try to find a chronological order because it seems like it would make sense at first, but it's not chronological. And STEM would argue that it's P through 20 as much as a high school post-secondary. So they're just on there to represent a notion, and I'm glad Ben called it out, which is that with each of these groups, they themselves have a stakeholder input process within their proceedings that presumably those stakeholders, which include the public and staff in many cases, would be involved in the process of getting a recommendation to us. So there's a bar of stakeholder input for each of these groups. And also for each of these groups, there's a best practice filter, whether it's a specific committee or if it's the intent of the body itself to always be thinking of best practices. there's a filter. And I want to point out that one of the best practices on this sheet is an equity lens for most of these groups. So if you're wondering where's equity lens, that's actually a best practice. And I can explain that in more detail if you want, but it's just implied in what I think about as a best practice. So the idea here is that the input from each of these groups is going to come to outcomes and investments in some order and with a format that we decide on. And I think the discussion earlier was terrific about that. And that's going to come to this group. What also is going to happen is many of the people in this room who are staff also meet together as a group of, we call it P through 20. It really should be birth to college and career because we are beyond P20. But we talk as agency folks about how to connect together, how to leverage each other's ideas. So what comes to the committee here is going to be back at P20 and zigzag back and forth. And ultimately, according to this graphic, at the end of this process, the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee in collaboration with P through 20 would be presenting ideas to the OEIB board. Now, I want to point out two things that are not on this graphic before I take questions and input on it that are based on the conversation Nancy and I had this morning about what's missing on the graphic. So one thing that's missing that should inform our thinking and will inform budgeting is existing legislation or any new legislation that is going to come into effect during this biennia that has a fiscal. And the preeminent example is all-day kindergarten. And whether or not that is a budgetary initiative as well as exactly how that fits into the budget, I think that's a great source of discussion and something that ODE will bring up. But it clearly has to be brought up in the discussion because it's existing legislative change. And there might be other legislative change that I'm not thinking of right now that involve other parts of the P20 system that are already in the pipeline that we already have to consider. And I think...
Yeah, Peter, some of that will come through some of these committees, like kindergarten could come through best practice, but we just have to make sure, be clear if there's any that's not moving through a committee, but, something there's been a commitment to, or that looks like it will emerge as part of legislation or something.
So we figured that we would have that be a P20. It already is something we talk about in the P20 agency when we meet together is what are the legislative concepts that are out there, what is legislation that's been put forward by other folks that are going to affect us. So that group's going to continually inform the thinking. And the other thing that's not on the graphic is at the end of this process, however long it takes, a couple of months, what Nancy was suggesting that another level of stakeholder engagement at that point when we have a list, maybe it's our top 10 or however you are going to process this and come up with a product, that top 10 list, as you would, goes back out to the field to get some, and it's on Whitney's schedule August through early September, potential public outreach. But specifically, that would be outreach to other partners that also lobby for systemic educational funding issues. There's some obvious ODE, COSA, OSBA. There's probably a lot of other ones that aren't so obvious that are public partners that are also going to be, when it comes around to funding time, making suggestions. And that's another opportunity not only to vet our ideas, but to look for ways that we can coordinate our asks with other groups. So that's missing from the graphic, and I can add that in the next iteration. And I guess the question is the graphic representational of how you see your role vis-a-vis these different groups reporting?
Can you filter the graph into our schedule?
Absolutely.
Okay, how does that?
Yeah, well, I think what I could do now that once Whitney's got approval on the schedule from you and we have those folks slotted in is the way I could order this picture is just the order that they're going to come to you this year. And I, for one, hope the Quality Education Commission remains first on that list because they're going to be a group that's going to be able to provide a really good context for all the successive discussions about things like implementing change. And one thing the QEC has found out, for example, is that regardless of the change you implement, if the environment is not prepped correctly, the investment fails. And so that's some important information that they'll be able to present and the research behind it that is shown to be true in Oregon, because I think it develops the kind of questions that you would ask in future meetings of the next committees. Well, how are the stakeholders already on board? or what structures are in the institutions that are going to accept this change and move forward. So yes, Dick, we'll reorganize it so it meets with the chronological visits.
What, can you say a little more about the relationship on the right-hand side between the two boxes, our committee and the P20? Are those sort of parallel and feed into OAIB, or do they interact in some way, or how do you see those working?
They interact through the staff members who are here or who attend both meetings. So a number of the folks that are in this room either speaking or in the audience are in those meetings. And this is a topic every single time P20 meets. We reviewed this agenda as a group that we're talking about right now. It was improved as a result of input from that group. They'll be looking at what was said, of whether they're in attendance or not. So if something happens halfway through the process as part of this group, that's the next great idea, it will be a topic of P20 within 2 weeks after that, because we meet every 2 weeks. So we're the sort of carriers of that information back and forth.
I had 2 questions.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
I keep jumping into Duncan's queue, sorry. Where in, I don't know if it's a question for you, it might be a question for Whitney too. Where in the process do we consider what we think is coming from a change perspective from the feds? So we talked about that in terms of state legislation,
Yeah.
but at least on the early learning side, there's some big changes coming in terms of resources, but also big changes coming in terms of expectations of role. I mean, feds are on a beeline to change the role of Head Start. That has an implication for what we do. So where does that come in?
Well, it strikes me that's a prompt now for each of these groups on this template. It's also a prompt for P20. So I think there's people in different areas of it that would need to be attentive to it. That's a real helpful, because obviously it brought to mind a couple of things, just with what Hannah was talking about in terms of assessment, I'm sure across the spectrum. So I think we would have to prompt it as much as
It'd be nice to have an overlay, on what's here, what's coming, put it right on top.
And some of it we know is coming, some of it we think is coming, but...
Well, and when Duncan described everybody coming together, I sort of saw a whiteboard with lots of stuff going on to it, or an interactive whiteboard. And I think we have to be real conscious when we start to take notes on this, when there are overlapping things, how do we account for that and remember it? It's so easy just to forget a big thing, especially when you're working long hours.
And then you're in the details of it. My second question is, where, I think I know, but I need to hear a little bit more. Where and how does the best practice filter get applied?
So within each of these agencies, and some of these I'm more familiar with others, so I could talk about, say, STEM Council, for instance. So STEM Council, in discussing their expectations for asks in terms of investments, are discussing what are the best practices in terms of getting more underrepresented students to take classes in high school. What are the best practices in terms of getting early learners to think that this is an outcome that they might have? And so we're going to prompt them to do it, but that's the work of their committee. And I don't know, I've never been to a youth development, a YDD meeting, so I don't know, but I'm assuming that that's what drives their discussion. I'd be surprised if it didn't, but so I guess that's my answer. I'd be surprised if any of these don't have it as a filter. Quality Ed Commission, that's half of what they do, or maybe more than half.
So we're expecting that filter is applied by the time it comes to us. Is by these groups. And so I'm going to get a little geeky because this is my day job.
In the decision-making process, so if you look at the calendar, we've got some work sessions that come after you have heard all this. I think in the decision-making process that another evidence-based filter and probably more of a return on investment filter gets applied by you all, because they can, there's a lot of groups here. They can all bring their top 3 to 5 ideas. You've got to synthesize it down, and so
that's partly where I was going, because there's, so I'm a little geeky because this is my day job, but there are thresholds of evidence, and is there any opportunity for us to say, to the point of moving the ball or moving the ball faster or getting rid of mandates, that we're going to accept this threshold as an acceptable threshold for us? So, and we may not want to do that, but I would rather us say we don't want to do that than just to assume that everybody's thinking of best practice or evidence-based in the same way, because we're not.
Sure, and I think it's really critical when you talked about 5 or 6, I was thinking achievement compact measures,
Yeah.
there's more. The ones we pick should be ones we can measure pretty easily, and it would be really convenient to pick ones where there's already research about return on investment.
Yes.
For instance, graduation rate. There's return on investment data around what 1% change in the graduation rate means to the state economy on a per capita basis. Not even just to the
But
kid.
in the same breath, though, we got to bring in Duncan's deal on the schools for what's the
Technical training.
Technical
Yeah.
training, too,
Right.
because there's an ROI there too.
Right, and I'm sure there's ROIs in early
Well,
learning. I mean, we should just be cognizant of the fact that we need to pick something where even in a couple of years, we're going to see some change, or else part of the function of this committee is to see that motion. And there might be motion going on that we don't see unless we're careful to pick the right metrics for those folks to focus on. And that goes back to your, in terms of best practice, well, what's the effect size of this best practice?
Right.
This is probably way over too simplistic, but isn't this a public launch? If JLWN's coming out with a new product, they're going through the same things, and they only will have a chance to go public once with the first impression. So we got to make sure as we go along here that when we have to have all these things with Pam's bringing in and all of that. So when maybe it's over dramatization, but I mean, I think there's a cynical group out here that says, oh yeah, you guys are going to come out with a new program for education? Yeah, right. So we want to really make sure that we have our I's dotted and our T's crossed when we do the launch here. And this is the opportunity between now. I mean, there's an opportunity here to really screw up, I would think. And so we don't, or go back to the same way we're doing business. I guess maybe that'd be a little more polite. So, but we also have an opportunity to really doing something here. So, and that's what we're going to do.
So, I mean, my take on that is it's how we behave as people come before us and asking the right questions up front and during the sessions, and it should be all about the outcomes. Sorry, Hannah, or results, whatever we want to call it. But what is it going to take to significantly improve? And we're not just talking about budgets, we're talking about changing policy, delivery, mandates, however you want to call it. And if we stick to that question and really imagine, and I think if we can even create a template for the product, which I hope is not around the K-12 budget, the higher ed budget, it's around, these are the critical results we're trying to accomplish. And I'll use the community college presentation, which I thought was, Andrea did a fabulous job. She had 4 areas, remedial, CTE, first time, English language learner. I mean, she had 4, what was the 4th? Data. There was a data piece, but the equity piece. Yeah, so she had, but you could clearly put targets to them. You clearly had redesign ideas behind them, and we could have at the end of this process, these are the changes, and if we do these budgets and these changes, we think we can get these results. So it's about Oregon and the students, and Oregon and the outcomes, or results. Again, I'm going to use different words, but. And if we're clear that that's what we're producing in this, I think we will have an incredibly different product for the governor to present in the fall. It will be amazing.
I was just thinking the idea of having the QEC come first for best practice, I think, Pam, is really important, so they can kind of set the stage, and then we can, at least for K-12, we've got that. But on this chart, and I'm glad we're talking about some other outreach later, but I just want to say the public testimony at the OEIB meetings, we do have public testimony. You have 3 minutes to share information at a time when most educators and parents aren't available. And I think it's important, again, that we find an avenue to where we're really out there understanding what's going on from the ground level. And we tried the forums. I enjoyed hearing what Oregonians had to say. I think I learned a lot, but that didn't work for some. So what's our strategy to really say that we've listened to the public? Because I've been in enough school board meetings, and I know who comes before the school boards. And if a department comes in front of the school board, special ed department, it doesn't necessarily represent the parents, the students, and the educators that are working with those individuals. And I think we need to know deep into, to get the commitment from Oregonians that, yeah, we do want to make change, and here's what we're committed to doing. And until we get that commitment, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels, because If you want to see real change, you've got to have the people who are doing the work commit to it. And they've got to believe that we're doing, in my opinion, if you want educators to make change, they have to believe that it's really going to help their students. And then they'll do whatever they need to do.
So I guess the way that later stages look, I think really we can co-create that. I just want to throw out that the modern approach to this is something that's crowdsourced or uses an approach like Kickstarter, where folks with a stake in the game actually represent their interest in something with a financial. And I don't know if there's any way to capitalize on that notion or use some kind of electronic method so that you could get, if you gave everybody 5 votes and who was involved and they had some certain things there, how would that fall? And there's ways that we could maybe do things differently to get it. I do think it's hard though to just ask the public, what do you want? It's such a generalized question. Yep. That we have to go through some stages of winnowing down or clarifying or grouping to be able to then get that public input. I mean, Kickstarter wouldn't work if people just put out crazy half-baked ideas. They have to put out something that's pretty baked.
And the other piece of this, which I think is part of the dilemma of the tight blues, is what we're trying to do is create conditions where folks on the ground can innovate on their own without having, so Nancy can do an A3 or a new academy, and how do you create an environment that, as Greg Heyman said, I want the incentives lined up to do what I want. I don't want you to tell me what to do, but I want to have the state investing in a way that allows me to do what I want to do, which is a somewhat different question for the field in terms of it, because what I imagine over time is a lot more diversity of education delivery around the state. We're not creating a one size or one homogenous education system. It's going to get more diverse, and I think we've got to think about that as we ask people what they want.
Doug, did you?
Yeah. Just my admitted bias about the QEC is that we're one of the best examples of cross-silo, full P20 group that meets together. Excellent group of people. And happy to be coming and talking to this group. And I would also commit, if it's helpful, to coming to each of the meetings and providing context for each of the,
cool.
If it's helpful.
Yeah.
So we can commit to all of them if you'd like.
Awesome.
Okay, great.
Okay. Any more comments with Peter?
Can I make one more suggestion for Pam? So
Yes.
I think why don't we invite the feds to make a presentation?
Wouldn't that be?
Oh, interesting.
I think they should come. Say, here's what we're doing. We want your input on what we should do and how to align. And see if they, by deputy secretary or somebody. I don't know who it would be. But let's say, the governor's got this process and we're trying to do results, and we think you really need to be part of it. Explain our theory of action, and maybe they'd listen.
Is there a comparable governance activity or initiative at the federal level to link all levels of education? Does Department of Ed go to preschool and Head Start?
They have started, I was just there last week, I guess. They have started an interagency coordinating council that has just started to meet. It's got education and health and human services, and I can't remember who all else, transportation, I can't remember who all else is there.
On the education side, we do have the advantage of it being a single department.
I would love to hear their theory of action behind the outcomes. That would be fascinating.
Because I agree with Hannah. I think it's a preposterous system that they've created in terms of how they think about it, the level of intervention, and so I would love to have them explain to us how they think they're going to get the outcomes they want by their strategies. It would be fun. Nothing ventured, nothing lost.
I think so too. Okay, we can put that on.
Ron, you probably have a few questions of your own with asking. I do. Totally unrelated to this table.
The fun comment may carry it, because it's hard for me to imagine it ultimately being very useful.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
Well, what it could do, though, honestly, because I think our ultimate goal may well be what I think Hannah is suggesting is a waiver. Because I really think my own theory of the feds is we ought to tell them, we ought to commit to some clear results and say, you got to give us more flexibility on how to achieve these results.
So see, to get there though, Duncan, I agree with that, but inviting them in, you are going to get the, deputy, once met the secretary in a hallway kind of a person. And so to have what we really want is a discussion that says, here's what we're trying to do in Oregon, and we need a meaningful discussion about what the federal government's trying to do and how they might, be able to cooperate or accommodate or something. That's a high-level discussion.
Yeah.
I don't know if the governor wants to do that or Nancy wants to do
Yeah,
that.
well,
or somebody,
yeah.
But
That's
that to me, calling in some, they're going to send us somebody who's going to, give us a report and have no ability to interact with us at all. And so I think a strategy for how this group or Danny or the governor or Nancy or somebody, brings the federal government into a meaningful discussion is a great idea.
Okay, but that's where my head is. It probably isn't this group. I think you're right. It's probably the governor.
Okay, any other comments? We'll go to public testimony.
But I think that would be a
Okay.
fabulous recommendation to come out of the recommendations. I mean, if there are that many substantial barriers, we do have a governor who has a willingness to push those boundaries, then that would be fantastic.
Well, in the ideal, the governor's the chairman of our committee. The best thing is probably to have our committee have such a meeting, but have the governor participate in that one so that he could request a higher level of federal participation.
Well, and going back out to the field to say, don't assume that you can't make changes to federal policy. Rather,
Absolutely.
If you redesign, get the results you want, if it's a matter, don't presume that that's a barrier. We should think about that.
Absolutely. Back to, your point, Hannah, if we're identifying things that need to be done differently, but there are barriers to doing them differently, more of those barriers are federal than state.
Yes.
Or at least a lot of them are. So we need to have a strategy for how we're going to address them.
Although I do think to that point, Ron, I think that's a really important point. But I do think that our interpretation of some of those federal regulations are barriers in and of themselves.
Yeah, I can get it right.
Yeah.
There is a fair amount of flexibility in how you interpret and implement federal reg, and not always, but I think sometimes we are our own problem in
we often
thing. I'll just say, on the early learning side, we clearly are our
So
own
I would
problem.
say more broadly, Pam, I think you hit a great point. This group, as well as the governor or whatever, we just need a strategy for how we're going to deal with these federal issues because they so impact what we're doing. And so whether it's to just be a little bolder on how we interpret and not ask, or whether it's to have some other interaction, that federal part has to somehow fit in this discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Pell Grants at McLaren comes to my mind. That's another story.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go public testimony. Kathy?
Can I, just before we move to public
Yes, you
testimony,
certainly
I'm really
can.
sorry. I want to go to the schedule particularly just to point out a couple of things. And it sounds like we might have a conflict on June 19th, but Pam, that date does not work for Pam.
Doesn't work for me, I'll be.
It doesn't work for me.
on the beach with it.
I will not be here on the 29th.
I wish I was
So there's not going to be, I'm sure, any way that we can get everybody at every meeting. But in places where we've got more than one, which it sounds like June 19th, I think we
There's
might.
3 of us. Duncan,
Yeah.
you're going to have your own meeting.
Yeah.
Duncan and...
Yeah.
Well, we'll really move that day then.
That way we'll assign assignments for the rest of the year, and we will,
So maybe I'll just go through it real quick. So May 29th, who cannot attend?
I will not be here.
Okay.
can you call in, or are you out of the country?
I'm in Europe.
Okay.
Meetings in Europe.
Okay.
If everyone else can attend, we'll leave it.
Yep.
And,
Okay.
okay. So June 19th, Hannah and Pam, so I think we need to reschedule
And
that.
Ron, right?
No, I can be here on the 19th.
Oh, you can't.
July 17th?
You want to try to resolve the 19th now, or?
No,
Okay.
we'll send out a
Okay.
thingy.
July, what is it?
July 17th?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll reschedule the 19th only, and then
In August,
we are trying to work on 2 work sessions. One in that slot between July 17th and August 12th, which Seth has sent you a doodle poll on.
Okay.
And then we'll have a second work session on August 21st. let's check August 21st for folks, 'cause it looks like Pam is out of town that day.
Could that July 17th one have both the meeting and the work session at the same time?
You mean like an extended meeting, Dick?
Yeah, extended meeting.
Oh, that's a good thought.
Or even throw in lunch.
Which one?
July
July
17th.
17th. Having presentations and then a work session
Yes,
in order to not
From
have to
11 to 1
schedule.
or something?
Yeah, I'd rather
Or
do
longer.
Yeah, longer. I'd rather do a
Okay,
long
do like
day.
a 9 to 3 or
Okay.
whatever.
I love it, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a chance I'll have to be by phone that day, but I can participate.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we could try to hook up a.
And then August, what was the date? The
Or if
21st?
it's gonna be in Portland, I can catch a ride with somebody. I just can't.
Good.
The 21st, I'm sorry, I wasn't.
August
Have a
21st.
side
Okay.
conversation.
It's okay with me?
Okay with me?
All right, let's keep that one then.
So the only one we have a conflict in is June then?
Yep. Yep,
Okay.
okay, we'll get on another date.
Let's definitely meet though. I mean, we definitely need to meet.
Yes, no, we do. And we'll need to have it settled quickly so that we can get information out to the groups that'll come and present. So my proposal to you all is that Peter and I would work on a template and send that out to you by email for feedback so that we can shortly get it out to these groups so they can be preparing for the presentation to you.
Great.
Does that sound good?
Makes sense.
Good. Okay. Okay, Dick.
Okay, great. No, that's great. Well, and we can come back to it after public testimony too. Kathy, identify yourself and then fire away.
I'm Kathy Ems, and I'm president of Parent Child Preschools of Oregon, which is umbrella group of cooperative preschools. And I'm also recently retired learning specialist, and my life was making sure the kids in my school read by 3rd grade, so I really support that goal. The kindergarten readiness goal, though, is what I just want to say one thing, that all of the research that I have read, or at least the overwhelming majority, says young children learn best in a play-based, constructivist, child-centered, those are all the kinds of words that are used. Their scores are better at 3rd grade if they've played at 3 and 4. That's how little kids learn. Some of them barely talk. You know, they're not ready to learn letters. Someone said more young people reading at an earlier age, meaning 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade is what I hope was meant, because most children are not really ready to learn before that age, learn to read before that age. They need to be building, they need to be talking, learning to share, learning to understand books that are read to them, building their vocabulary, understanding math concepts by building and measuring. That's what their brains are meant to do when they're 3. They're not meant to memorize letters and sounds. So I just hope you keep that in mind as you look at early childhood activities.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to respond? Or you're just looking at me?
I just have a question.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I guess the question I have, because I haven't really looked at, is our kindergarten readiness reflective of that perspective?
So it depends on how you view it, right? So here's what I mean. So there's 3 components to kindergarten readiness assessment. One is an early literacy component that's about recognition of letters and sounds. Another is a math component, which is about numbers. And another is a kind of approaches to learning. It's the self-regulation piece about can they pay attention, can they share, can they do all of those kinds of things. So the literal interpretation and the fear that Kathy and others have, and we've talked about this a lot at the Early Learning Council, is if you literally interpret that what we want is more children learning more letters earlier, then you get a teach to the test where preschools become all about nothing, not play-based, but just about rote memorization of letters and sounds. That's not the case, right? These are proxy measures that we know the kids who have those experiences and who have a strong family foundation are more likely to know letters and sounds and numbers and be at where they need to be in terms of self-regulation. So those are proxy measures. They're not what we're trying to drive into the early learning system.
So how do you avoid proxy measures becoming things you teach to?
We're working on that. We're gonna make some, we're gonna be making, it's why it's a composite. It's not one instrument, it's a composite instrument, and we're gonna be, the Early Learning Council will make some recommendations for adjusting that going forward. But we're trying to save as much as we can.
That's a huge issue in assessment. I mean, that's.
It's everywhere. It is everywhere.
Because they're supposed to be snapshots that,
Right.
for the whole system, but then they get rid of the student. I mean, that's.
It is
it's
everywhere.
a huge problem.
And it's a big problem, and we need to take it on systemically, not just with the kindergarten readiness. I mean, it's this tension that we talked about earlier, about you want indicators of progress, but you don't want them to be all, right?
When the more valid a measure is, the less reliable it is, in general. If you want something really reliable, you pick something that's not all that valid, but it's easy to measure.
Right.
Terrific.
It's a huge.
And again, it's for the system, not for the student. These are systems measures.
They're
not students.
that's exactly it.
And that's the
They're
distinction I
population
think we made on
measures.
assessment. That those, I mean, that's what I think screwed up all the reading benches. We're not intended for student.
The best example of that is the consumer reports for car dealers, because you just break the code on the, give a person a free blue ball filter and they fill out the card and you send it in yourself. It's crazy.
I think Peter made a comment earlier today about the culture and just the whole atmosphere. And I think we've lost sight of what that is. And when I was in Beaverton, they were talking about taking away all the center time in kindergarten. No more recess. We've got to do this academic. This is about academic. And it's like, and I take it back to, if it were your child or your grandchild, would you want them to just be sitting there learning those letters, or would you want them to be happy and healthy and be out playing and getting along? Those things are important for our students to have that, and then they can actually learn. When they're so stressed and we put that pressure on our students, then we take away their ability to thrive.
Okay, any other comments for the good? I think I started in recess. I hope they wouldn't take that away.
Aren't you still there? Aren't you still there?
Yeah, the only 8 I got, I think. Okay, thank you very much. We adjourn.